Hello, welcome to my channel. This is What If Naruto Saves Karin from a Bear in the Forest of Death Part 10. Check out the author in the description and the fanfic, and have a nice day.
Sarutobi read the scroll that was delivered to him courtesy of a messenger toad inside of his own home with a weary frown as it reported on Jiraiya's chase and the conclusion. Orochimaru had eluded them again. Not only that, but Jiraiya theorized he used Anko Mitarashi's body in order to bring himself back and was using it as his current vessel. They couldn't be completely certain on the method of how the cursed seal acted as a means of transferring his soul into a vessel. Whether he booted the soul of the victim out or some other means was alien to them. Their only hope of understanding it would be investigating the cursed seal on the captive that Anko had sent to the village. Inoichi's more invasive method of mind reading, done with the Hokage's consent given her affiliation, crimes against their village, and the urgency of the situation had rendered her brain dead. From there, they could keep her body alive while they poked and prodded her seal until they could understand it well enough to find a way to remove it without the risk of death. To find a way to free Sasuke Uchiha and Karin Uzumaki from sharing the same fate in the future. But for all intents and purposes, Anko Mitarashi was among the dead now. She would have to be added to the memorial stone. Her charge, Karin, would also need to be informed given the circumstances. A weary sigh left his mouth at the thought. Anko was a bright child and promising Kunoichi. More than anything, she regretted her affiliation with Orochimaru and proved her loyalty to their village time and time again. Yet this was how it ended for her used to return the man she hated the most in the world back to the land of the living. Back to threaten their village in due time because he didn't kill Orochimaru the first time his treachery came to light. His fingers trembled as they curled into fists. If he had killed him back then, the betrayal of sand, and this would not have happened. His former student wouldn't have mutilated his very soul into something so monstrous, denied their village founders their final rest, and the chains shackling Jiraiya to chase after him would never exist. Bah thump. NGH, his fingers fell over his chest, grasping for his heart. Since that day his age had been catching up to him. Even with Tsunade's help, he would not stave off death forever. The question was, would he die before he corrected this travesty, or leave behind an immortal monster to haunt their village until it was naught but ashes? For now, he would deal with the coffin containing their village founders. He would have it taken to the sealed hall on the outskirts of the village. There it would be stored away along with other forbidden objects and left until they could find some way to return their souls to where they belonged. Naruto was roused the next morning by his alarm clock, its constant ringing reverberating in his skull. He groaned as he sat up in the bed, the sleeping cap's tail brushing against his cheek as he rubbed his eyes. The fog of slumber clouded his mind and left him wondering why he was getting up so early on a weekend as he yawned. "Did you sleep well?" a feminine voice asked from next to him. "I guess." His eyes snapped open as he registered the voice, driving the lethargy from his mind. "Karin?" "Good morning," Karin Uzumaki said from her seat at the foot of the bed. "I didn't startle you, did I?" A bit. Fully awake now, he scratched his cheek as he looked her up and down. Karin was wearing a lavender blouse that covered her arms and fell down to her hips. Her pants fell down to her socks and a pair of open-toed sandals. "How long have you been here?" "An hour or two ago. I didn't want to wake you up by knocking, so I figured that I would just—" Karin shifted her eyes to the door, looking away from him as she admitted the truth. "I picked the lock since it was part of my training and then watched you for a bit while you slept." "That was risky," Naruto said in warning. And if he had to admit it, the part about her just watching him sleep for a while was a bit creepy. If an Ambu patrol caught you doing that, it could have caused problems. "I had my mind's eye active," she explained. "That's also how I knew you were asleep." Naruto shook his head. "That's not the point. You shouldn't risk yourself like that just because you didn't want to wake me. It would have been weird to explain it to the old man if you were caught somehow." She looked down at her hands as her fingers curled around the hem of her blouse. Yeah, I kind of figured that much after I was already inside. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. I'm not sure why though. I've been feeling a little off balance since the end of the date where Naruto felt a weight drop into the pit of his stomach when she pressed two fingers to her lips to get the point across about their kiss the previous night. Did I do something wrong? Karin shook her head. Originally, I was just going to give you another kiss on the cheek that time. But then I impulsively kissed you on the lips, despite telling myself during the date I didn't want to scare you off. I played it off well, but after I shut the door my heart was pounding and my thoughts were scrambled. I couldn't tell if you enjoyed it, or were as confused as me, or if I had left a bad impression, and I'm rambling now. Naruto realized this was probably the most flustered he'd seen Karin. She always carried herself so well under normal circumstances, so he kind of expected her to be more or less the same after the date. But now it was like a switch had been flipped. If it's gotten you this bothered, we should talk about it. She hummed lowly as she considered it. You're sweet, Naruto, but I'd rather not try to explain what I'm feeling to you out of fear that I'd spook you. Okay. Well, what about talking to Ni then? He asked, recalling the advice she'd given him. You know her, she knows about us, and we still have time before we need to get to the ceiling R&D building for the mask thing. If we go now, I'm sure she can help you sort things out, and I did promise to tell her how it went. Karin bit her lower lip in thought for a moment. Then she nodded, her red hair swaying with emotion. Yes, I think that'd be best. I'll be able to concentrate better once I get it off my chest. All right, I'll make a clone to go with you while I go take a shower and get ready for the day, Naruto said, rising to his feet. It'll dispel once you get there, and you'll be able to talk in private until I'm ready to meet up there. Afterwards, I'll see about getting a copy of my key made for you later today. Did expect to hear from Naruto the next day about how his date went. So when he came with Karin this morning and told her that it went well, she was glad for him and promised to write down the recipe for his other little friend who helped him. However, she didn't expect that Karin would want to talk to her afterwards and for Naruto to be a clone. But she was always willing to lend an ear to a friend of Naruto's. So she took the girl back into the shop while her dad manned the front and heard her out. And it proved to be the smart thing to do, considering what she told her about breaking into his room to watch him sleep. You know, I was originally planning on doing the big sisterly thing and warning you against breaking Naruto's heart, said, after listening to her explain herself. But now I'm a bit more worried about you moving too fast with him. Me too, actually, Karin said, placing her hand over her heart. Normally, I act a lot more rational and wanted to take things slow with Naruto. But since last night something has changed, I've been feeling like it's all boiling inside of you, guessed, to which Karin nodded. What you're feeling is pretty natural. Love is a really powerful thing, especially for people who haven't had much experience with it. That's why I wanted to take things slow, she said. But my impulse control slipped twice in less than 12 hours, first with that kiss and then entering into his home like that. They both seemed like a good idea at the time, even though I should have known they weren't and realized that after the fact. Well, that's probably because there's no more uncertainty since the date. Think of the situation like, she looked around for something to explain it better and settled on a pot. Like a pot of water simmering in a low flame. Before, Naruto hadn't given any sign he was willing to commit, so you kept the flames level. With me so far. Karin nodded. And I'm guessing that date essentially turned up the flames and set the pot to boiling. That's right, said. Now imagine a bunch of noodles being thrown into the mix as well. Noodles make a pot of water boil over the edges really easily because there's a lot of things inside of it that come out under the heat. If you relate the pot to your self-control, the water to your emotions, the noodles towards love, and the excess that comes out under the heat being hormones, then when it boils over would be when your impulse control slips because your emotions have gotten too high to control, which explains the kiss on the lips and bedroom invasion. She frowned a bit as a light blush painted her face. Do you have to frame that last part that way? I shot her a stern glance. Naruto's becoming more mature, but he's still innocent at heart. He probably didn't consider the implications of you slipping into his home and watching him sleep. But I think we both know that you at least entertained the thought of kissing him again while he wasn't awake, didn't you? She didn't deny it outright. I didn't go through with it. This time, I am stressed. Next time it could be worse, especially once puberty really kicks in. You're mature for your age and can reason out why it's a bad idea, but the raw emotion is still there and it can consume you. Then, once it settles, you'll just have regrets. Trust me when I say a lot of people my age have done things like that because they didn't have someone to explain it to them like I am now. Does that include you? Karin asked. Almost, she admitted. There was a guy who I found attractive and thought he was pretty cool. Not shinobi cool, but by civilian standards. Dad didn't like him though, so we kept things a bit of a secret. It added a hint of spice to things that way. So what happened then? Naruto came in one day after looking like he had been crying because of something at the academy back when he was younger, she explained. Since he's a little brother to me in all but name, he was my priority, and I spent the evening lifting his spirits rather than leaving work early to go off with the guy. I could understand him being upset at that because I made a commitment and didn't see it through. But then he called Naruto a brat, and that pretty much cut the flames off right then and there. Jerk, Karin said to that. Yeah, he was. I sighed. Anyway, back with the analogy of boiling noodles. You stop them from overflowing by adding a little oil to it. That's what you need to do the equivalent of, keeping it boiling without spilling over. I'll give you some advice on that front. Thanks, Karin said, before licking her lips nervously and adding, Can we not tell Naruto about this? Your secret's safe with me, I assured her. Now, about that advice. It should be done charging in a few seconds, exclaimed the enthusiastic ceiling researcher said from behind the glass. After her talk with Iam, Naruto had arrived and went with Karin to the ceiling R&D building. There they found Naru waiting, despite it being relatively early in the morning. Considering the rings under her eyes, Karin found herself wondering if the woman even slept last night or spent the entire time making sure everything was ready for them. Well, at least Byaku's mask has been remade, Karin thought to herself. They had finished reconstructing it, with Naruto currently testing its capabilities, while she would be here to start the interview with the Divine Priestess first. Naruto would be handling the Divine Priests that were considered less of a hazard than the Reaper afterwards. They would save that one for last. And we're all set, Naru said through the speakers. Go ahead, Karin-chan. Okay. Turning the priestess mask over, Karin peeled off the chakra-storing slip that contained Naruto's yang chakra. Then she used a scalpel they provided to make an incision into her thumb, providing the blood to activate it. From the mask emerged a feminine figure of flowing white robes. A translucent ribbon woven from the air itself curved around its arms and back, swaying softly to a non-existent breeze. Landing before her daintily in the second focal circle, the Divine Priestess took form for the first time since the day that they found them. You summon me, child of the eddies? It spoke in a soft voice that tickled her mind through their spiritual link. How may I be of aid to you? It works, Naru said. We heard that on this side. You can start the discussion. Taking a deep breath, Karin began. Tenio, I've summoned you in the hopes that you could tell me more about yourself and the others, your capabilities, your origins, and the purpose of the divine gods. Why can't we summon them like we do you? The divine gods cannot be summoned through the means by which I stand before you, Tenio stated. I and the divine priests are messengers who act on their behalf and possess a fragment of their powers to aid those of the clan that dwelled by the eddies. Should one need to call upon the divine gods, they must be prepared to sacrifice instead. What do you mean? Karin asked. Those who seek the power of the divine gods must offer their body as a vessel and chakra as the means to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. The one who bears the mask upon their flesh becomes an avatar for them to descend and inhabit their bodies, allowing them to utilize power beyond their kin. But it is not without consequences, and should you attempt to do so as you are now, you will perish. Not eager to test that then, Karin decided before moving on. You mentioned you and the divine priest have a fragment of their powers. What does that mean? I shall show you. Bowing its head slightly, the divine priestess ribbon seemed to stretch out towards Karin. The moment it touched her forehead, her world melted as a memory that wasn't her own overtook her. She found herself standing in front of a beautiful red-haired woman who Karin recognized from one of the books she read. The woman dressed regally was standing there, cradling a mask with her hands tenderly as chakra flowed from her into it. Another vision quickly filtered in as that one faded. Karin found herself in the presence of that same woman decades later. Her red hair had faded to a gray and wrinkles lined her features, yet there was still an air of grace about her. Just as delicately as before, she cradled a mask in her grasp. Only this time she wasn't alone and handed it to another red-haired girl that Karin also recognized, instructing her to do the same. Karin-chan, what's happening? Naru's voice rang out abruptly. You've gone silent. Say something if you're okay. I'm looking at a memory, Karin said, her eyes still those of Tenio's as the ribbons flowed around her arms like water and touched the two Uzumaki women. It seems like the priestess can use her ribbons to transfer memories that she observes or between people. Right now, I'm looking at one of Tenio's memories of the ones responsible for maintaining the shrine and the masks within them before we stumbled across them. We're not getting visual here, Naru said. Can you describe them, and we can do research into them later on? I recognize them both, Karin said as the memory came to an end and the ribbons retracted from touching her head. The first was Mito Uzumaki. She must have been the one who took care of them initially. But as she aged, she needed another person to do so, and she chose another Uzumaki to do so, Kushina Uzumaki. Naruto's mother would have been the one to take care of them after the passing of Mito. Taking into account they were probably neglected during the various wars since it was established, combined with the near extinction of their clan at some point during the last one, Naruto's mother probably only visited to charge them, while leaving the temple in a state of disarray. And if she was the host of the nine-tailed fox before Naruto, and it had the same effect on her chakra that it did on his without purifying it, she wouldn't have been able to use them. A Jinchuriki probably had more worth to the village than the masks at that point since their clan was scattered. So, with her death upon Naruto's birth, it was likely that no one else would have known about it. Taking a deep breath, Karin addressed the divine priestess again. So, that's your ability then? To share memories or take them while they're bound? To be precise, it is the ability to connect minds, Tenio explained as more ribbons came into existence from the air itself. Wherever the winds blow, my ribbons can touch, and thus all are connected. The divine god I act on behalf of has the ability to perceive and manipulate the threads of fate upon which all is bound on a conceptual level. Connecting minds between others to allow them to commune with one another. Connecting hearts between others to bind them in love. Should it be needed, even connecting to the forces of the natural world is possible, such as if one connected the sky and the land, the winds would churn into a twister and sweep the land into the sky, bringing about whatever change you desired through manipulating the metaphysical or conceptual bonds. It sounded absurd to Karin on some level. But she supposed that if you were technically calling down a god to inhabit your body, then it would possible, theoretically. More worryingly, if that was what only one was capable of, what were the others capable of? Naruto was up next after Karin had finished with the priestess mask. To say that it was a shock that his mother had been involved with the keeping of the masks was an understatement. But he was grateful all the same since it meant that he could get to know her a little better through the shared memories within the mask, along with what Kakashi told him and what he could ask Jiraiya when he got back from wherever he was. Once summoned, the pair of monks explained their ability to create a barrier had more depth than Naruto expected. When they were alone, they could only affect a small area or individual targets. But when they were together, they could increase the radius and then dictate how that barrier interfered with the world outside of it, creating a territory where they dictated what entered and left. That was their fragment of power inherent from their divine god, the manipulation of space, the distance between things. Supposedly, while donning it, Naruto could dictate the laws of space within the domain under his influence. He could make right be left, up be down, or stretch the distance of something that was 3 steps away into 3,000. That left the Reaper, who he was now sitting opposite of for the first time since that fateful day in the woods. It floated in the air motionless, scythe held down as its clawed fingers relaxed. The mask it wore, which resembled a skull with 3 eyes, peered down at him in an unsettling manner as its mental voice began to reverberate. "State thy wish, bearer of Uzumaki blood," it asked. "I want to know what you and the divine god mask that you serve as the messenger of are capable of." "I am the reaper of that which is born of the melding of the physical and spiritual, that which is known as chakra." Its mask tilted downwards slightly, and it raised its scythe to a horizontal pose. "That which harbors it can be stripped of it and given to another. It is a modicum of the capabilities possessed by the one I serve, the god of death, whose domain is that of souls and balances life and death on its blade." Naruto felt a lump forming in his throat at that. The domain of souls, life and death. Did that mean he could use it to bring back his parents and meet them for the first time? Swallowing the lump that rose in his throat, he asked the question. "So that means if I were to put on the other mask, I would be able to bring back the dead." "Do not entertain such folly," it warned, its grip tightening on its scythe. Hostility similar to when they first met bled off it in waves. Naruto raised his arms up to pacify it. "You haven't explained everything yet, so I was making a guess. Am I wrong?" Its grip on the scythe loosened slightly. "Life and death are intertwined. To interfere with the Pure Lands, to deny the dead their rest and meddle with such a thing that distorts the natural order, is a sin most grave that the god of death does not take lightly. To harbor such intentions, to intend to use it for such a method while wearing the mask, would spell the end of you." "Okay, so if you attempt to use it to bring someone back from the dead, it'll make the god in the mask mad. Which is why those that seek to house the god of death within them must transcend that desire," it stated. "They must accept that all who live will die, and the god of death does not play favorites. It comes for all in the end. Only then may they bear the mask to become death itself. You may perceive the souls of others through whatever protection they have in place, determine the time someone has left, project your own soul from your body and commune with the dead in purgatory, help a restless soul find peace or seal it away, and so much more. Basically, it lets you do things with the soul, except for resurrect the dead." Naruto pondered with his lips pursed and his hand on his chin. The other masks dealt with things in the physical plane, but this one dealt more with spiritual affairs and was easily the most difficult to use compared to the rest of them. Anyone who wanted to use it would no doubt do so in order to bring back someone they lost. If you had to overcome that desire when the ability to do so was there, then wouldn't it be nearly impossible? Was it really meant to be used at all then? "Naruto-kun," Naru said through the speakers, stirring him from his thoughts. "The chakra readings are getting low from the last seal. If there are any more questions you want to ask, then do so now." "Right?" Giving it a bit more thought, he found there was a single question left he wanted to ask. "Is it possible to use the mask to find someone who's missing?" "So long as they live and you know their name," it said. "The name ties into the soul and is thus engraved into it." "Okay, thanks." Naruto gave it a slight bow of the head. "You can rest now." The Reaper went docile at the command, returning into the mask. The mask fell from where it floated and would have clattered onto the focal circle had Naruto's hands not shot out and grabbed it. He rose from his seated position and exited the observation room, where Naru and Karin were waiting for him. "Nice work, both of you," Naru said as he handed over the Reaper's mask. "We've got it all recorded. Now all I have to do is submit it to the Hokage, and we can see where to go from there next. Do you really think there are gods within the other masks? He asked. If there was anyone else there qualified to tell them, it would be the person overseeing the research. Who knows, she said cheerfully. Given that seals can be used to actually seal things within objects, it's not unfeasible that there are actual spirits or gods within the masks. It's not the like there isn't precedence. He suspected that she was referring to what was sealed inside of him. All the same, they could just be artificial constructs created through the crafting of the different layers of seals. She paused to tap her chin in thought and smiled. Actually, that would be more impressive. Could you imagine what it would be like to create something artificial yet on par with actual gods that could breach the borders of life and death? For some reason, Karin looked uncomfortable as she took a step back from the woman and changed the topic. Either way, I don't think it's safe to use those sets of masks right now. True, but you can't fault me at the thought of communing with the ancient sealing experts who made them in the first place. So many mysteries could be solved that way, she sighed wistfully. Anyway, I'll compile all of this and then get to them to the Hokage. We'll probably be in touch later on to see if we can glean more from them. That said, she gave Naruto the extra slips he wanted and then escorted them up and out of the building. The sun glared down on them from above as they stepped into the light, having been down there for a while now. It was maybe around midday if he had to guess as they walked together down the roads that were busier than before. Naruto was still lost in thought over what he'd learned when he felt a slight tug on his sleeve. Pulled from his thoughts, he turned to look at Karin. What's up? When you asked the Reaper about using the mask to find someone, she hesitated for a pause to bring herself to say it. That wasn't for Anko-san, was it? Yeah, he admitted. It doesn't sit right with me that she had to stay behind for us to get away. And I remember what you said about how you felt that it was your fault, so I figured if we can use it, then we could find her and bring her back. Thank you, Naruto. She brushed back her hair and smiled softly before changing the topic. So, what will you do now? I've got to go talk to Sasuke, he said, intending to keep his word to Sakura. Do you want me to come with you? She asked. Nah. He'll be grouchy enough as is because he's stuck in the village. I shouldn't bring someone else. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his key. Go ahead and get a copy of this made for yourself. She took the key from his hand delicately before leaning in close and giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. The pleasant touch of her lips spread through that side of his face and left him blushing as she pulled away. I'll pick up some groceries for dinner and see you tonight at your place. Sure, he muttered as she waved and then turned to leave down the streets. It took him a few seconds to snap out of it before he sighed to himself and went towards the Uchiha district. Thunk, thunk, thunk. A trio of kunai nailed the center of the targets as Sasuke continued through his drills, training not only to be stronger but to quiet his mind. He was growing restless now that he had a way out of the village, ready to leave with a simple series of seals and be whisked away. But at the same time, he was hesitating. There were still things he could learn from Kakashi. But if they were working on a way to remove the cursed seal, then he would lose that power as well. Was it worth the risk of staying just a little longer? Or should he disappear before anyone knew where he had gone? He'd be leaving behind everything within the village that belonged to his clan in doing so. No, he'd be leaving behind the village itself that was established by the Uchiha. They were one of the founding clans after all. But the village itself would stand in the way of his obligations to his family, so it was a necessity in the end. It's all Itachi's fault that it's necessary, he thought to himself as he yanked the kunai out of the tree. Then he felt another presence closing in on him and twisted around, flinging it in that direction. Come out. Whoa! Naruto emerged unharmed, upset but unharmed as he held the kunai between his fingers. That was close. Do you just throw these things around when someone surprises you? Yes. He caught it as Naruto sent it back his way and then crossed his arms. Besides, don't you heal fast anyway because of that thing inside of you? As long as I didn't hit your head, you'd be fine. Naruto looked shocked at that fact. You know, I'm not an idiot, I can see chakra. Your birthday is the same date as the attack on the village by the nine-tailed fox, and it wasn't that long since we dealt with Gaara, Sasuke pointed out. Granted, he'd only pieced most of that together last night, but Naruto didn't need to know that. It makes sense that they'd have you talk to him since you'd be able to relate to him. His former teammates seemed pensive at that, or almost apologetic. So is that part of why you've been upset lately, that I didn't tell you? Sasuke scoffed. I don't care about that. We've all got our reasons for what we do. My question is, why are you here now? Well, part of it's because I wanted to apologize because of what happened on my mission being the reason why you're stuck here in the village. The mission Orochimaru was talking about, he reasoned. The Snake Sannin had been vague and no one else would give him details, but if anyone was willing to talk it'd be Naruto. If you're going to apologize, then explain properly. Naruto saw fit to do so and gave him the highlights. He'd been attacked by Mizuki and then went after his clanmate. From how he was describing the battle that came afterwards, the Bone User had definitely gone into a second stage release with his cursed seal. Sasuke's mind raced as he listened while leaning against the tree, putting pieces to the puzzle with what he learned from Orochimaru. The man hadn't even been all that subtle in his wording about being a hypocrite if he faulted him for taking whatever power he could regardless of the means. Most likely his means of resurrecting himself was tied into the cursed seal and their hosts, which was why he'd chosen to appear now. Yet, at the same time, that same seal on the Bone User was enough to push Naruto further than Gaara did. He needed all the power he could get if he was going to kill Itachi. He couldn't let that fear of losing his body control him, could he? Anyway, that's how we ended up like this, Naruto finished. So I think we're stuck in the village until they find where that creep Kabuto is and get rid of the cursed seals from you and Karin. And you're okay with the fact that they sealed your second source of chakra away? Sasuke asked. That power was the only reason you were able to last against Gaara and the Bone User from the sound of it. Them sealing it away is the same as denying you a powerful tool you could use to get stronger faster. I couldn't control it and hurt Karin, Naruto pointed out. I'd rather work on my other techniques and focus on getting stronger with Sakura and the others than rely on the fox if I can. Sasuke shook his head. That line of thinking will get you killed. You shouldn't be picky with the means you choose to get stronger with. If I were in your shoes, I wouldn't be. I'd master it. Naruto took offense to that, his cerulean eyes narrowing and his voice growing heated. You can say that because you don't know what it's like. Imagine being swallowed in hatred that wasn't your own, unable to think clearly and filled with the urge to kill everyone around you. The last 2 times I relied on the fox's chakra to that extent, I nearly killed Sakura and Karin. Would being stronger at the price of your friends and family be worth it? The last of the Uchiha opened his mouth to say that he would, but his lungs froze before the words could come out once his mind caught up to the hypocrisy. That would be no different than what his brother did in the end. Itachi killed his entire clan for the sake of gaining the next level of his Sharingan and intended on returning to claim Sasuke's once it was matured. At the same time, Sasuke told himself moments ago that he would be willing to get his hands on whatever power he could, even if it meant leaving the village behind. If he truly believed that thought, Itachi had already spelled out a way for him to get stronger with his birthright, and it was right in front of him. The temptation pounded at his neck where the cursed seal was locked away, threatening to break free. They were alone. He had a way out of the village without being caught. Naruto couldn't heal himself quickly anymore and didn't have access to the nine-tailed fox. If Itachi's goal was to capture the Jinchuriki, putting Naruto down would be a hindrance to his plans as well. He could sever those bonds that Itachi intended to in a few years prematurely and gain the next level of his Sharingan to use against his brother here and now. Naruto was so unguarded he probably wouldn't need the cursed seal to kill him. He could simply put Naruto asleep with the eye of hypnotism and make it fast and painless. And the thought of it sickened him. Naruto was annoying. Frustratingly so. But killing him now like this, it felt wrong. As much as Sasuke hated his brother and wanted power to surpass him, slitting Naruto's throat when he couldn't fight back like that would be no different than what Itachi did to his mother and father. And if he became the very person he hated the most in the world, there would be no meaning in living past killing his brother. Not when he'd have done the same thing he was condemning him for. Not to mention that if he killed Naruto here, he would be hunted down by others who would ask him the same question that he asked his brother that day he killed their family. Maybe it'd be Kakashi or Sakura or even that clanswoman of his. But they'd all ask why he'd done it, and he'd give the same answer as his brother. Ignorant of what was going through his teammate's head, Naruto seemed to take Sasuke's silence as him being right and then continued on. Anyway, Sakura's been worried about how you've been going back to how you used to be. That's the other reason why I'm here. And what was wrong with how I used to be? Sasuke asked with a slight snarl in his voice. Naruto held his hands up. I'm just pointing out that you were kind of a jerk. And you were a buffoon who earned the title of dead last in our class, Sasuke said bluntly. Yeah, but now I'm a chunin. Only because you went first and my match was interrupted, Sasuke countered as he placed his empty hand on where the seal was and willed it to calm down, forcing the temptation down. Maybe, Naruto conceded, but the point is that we've all changed for the better, so don't go back to how you were back then. We've gone through so much as Team 7, and we're stronger as a team like during the finals. Don't throw that away by isolating yourself. Let me ask you this, Naruto, Sasuke said to him. What will happen when you face an opponent you need power to beat and don't have it because you denied yourself access to that power because you were afraid? Would you be fine with the results even if it cost the lives of those you were protecting or those of us fighting alongside you as a team? Think hard, Sasuke warned him before he said something stupid. Because someday you'll have to make that decision for yourself. Will you remain weak and rely on others and risk getting them killed? Or will you do whatever you can to become powerful enough to stand on your own, even if that method meant making everyone hate you, including yourself? Naruto shook his head after a moment and his eyes filled with resolve. I'd focus on making it so that there was no need to fight. But if it came down to it, I'd focus on making sure that everyone was strong enough to survive, not just myself. TCH, only you'd think of something that naive. He turned and then started to walk away. I'll think about what you said with Sakura, but I'd advise you to try mastering control over that demon within you. Otherwise you'll die without accomplishing anything because you were a coward. He ignored Naruto calling for him afterward and headed back home to be alone with his thoughts. His obligation to the fallen members of his clan was not only to avenge them, but to rebuild his clan as a whole. It couldn't be rebuilt on the same foundation that Itachi had used to gain the next level of his Sharingan. Besides, now he knew Orochimaru's plan. As long as the Snake Sannin remained ignorant of that, Sasuke could make his own plans in turn. By the time he had nothing left to teach him, Sasuke was sure he'd have a way of dealing with both him and Itachi. The Hokage Hiruzen Sarutobi sat with his pipe tucked into the corner of his mouth as he listened to a copy of the audio recording of the various masks' capabilities. His mind raced at the implications and revelations from Kushina and Mito's involvement to the presence of the Death God. That one in particular caught his interest. If what the Reaper spoke was accurate, this could be the key to stopping Orochimaru once and for all, he said as the recording ended and swiveled his chair around to the front, shifting his view from the window to the living room of his home where his students were. Jiraiya was leaning against the wall opposite of Tsunade, who was seated on his couch. What are your thoughts, Tsunade? Jiraiya. You think it's real? Tsunade asked, skepticism thick in her voice. She had the blood of Uzumaki within her too, and her grandmother was the caretaker of the masks before, so she had a right to know these things as well. Not to mention they could be the key to allowing the first and second to return to their eternal rest. For all we know, those masks could have just been exaggerating. It's not something we can know without testing, but it wouldn't hurt to have some faith, Princess, Jiraiya said in response. It's at least a better solution than nothing if it pans out. Sarutobi exhaled a thin string of smoke as he watched her brows fold into a glare. Her anger was palpable, but both of them knew for a fact that it wasn't directed at them. She had been seething under the surface since Jiraiya brought her the news of the first and second personally. Tsunade loved her grandfather and granduncle. To have them brought back as mindless killing machines was something that she'd taken hard, more so considering her enforced sobriety. So, while she wanted Orochimaru dead and them put to rest, she wanted an absolute solution rather than relying on faith, and that meant proof. Fortunately, Sarutobi believed that he had some form of proof. One of the techniques that Minato perfected and came to me with was a means by which you could summon the god of death and imprison one's soul within its belly. I didn't know how he came up with the concept of the technique. In fact, I was wary of it given how Orochimaru had dabbled in immortality, and I labeled it a forbidden technique. However, had Jiraiya not arrived in the village when he did, I had intended to use it as my final card to deal with Orochimaru should the need arise. Being sealed within the death god's stomach with Orochimaru would serve as penitence for not ending his life before he warped his soul to such an extent and threatened the village. It wouldn't be the best solution now, given what they knew, but it would still have bought them more time. Still, if Kushina knew of the masks and what they were capable of, then it was very likely that the technique was one of the Uzumaki clan, a method of harnessing the mask's power for a single technique. Tsunade took his words at value at least, which was what he set out to do by revealing that information. Okay, assuming it might work, we don't know the amount of chakra needed for them to function. If those kids put them on and don't meet the requirements, they won't get a second chance, and there goes the last people capable of using them. It seems Tsuda-san came up with her own theory on creating a means by which it could be feasible, Sarutobi said, holding up the woman's written report and request. He passed it over to Jiraiya. See for yourself. It sounds like she's making assumptions based on the layers requiring a set amount of chakra to activate, multiplied by the number of layers, Jiraiya said as he skimmed it. It's sound in theory if she can precisely predict a base number to know the amount needed. And she also proposed a seal that would be fixed onto the body, storing yang chakra similar to the prototype slips she gave to Naruto over a longer period of time. It would require human testing before it would be allowed though, and she needs express permission from the acting Hokage. Furutobi took a drag from his pipe and exhaled. I told her that I would consider it once I found a reference that would be liable not to cause anyone lasting harm. Well, off the top of my head, the only things that I can think of that would be viable are the cursed seal, the seal on Naruto's stomach, and the seal on Princess' head, Jiraiya said. The first is out because we still don't know all the mechanics of how Orochimaru worked with it, otherwise we'd be removing them from the kids now. Though we could bring her in on that one, and maybe she could use what she learned in that regard. And while Naruto's is holding the fox, which is composed of yang chakra from what we can tell, its chakra is corrupted enough to where the trace amounts in his chakra network makes the masks reject it unless he purifies it. Not to mention whatever mental hang-ups he'd have after his last mission. Didn't your sage training teach how to deal with such things? Sarutobi inquired, quieting the mind and such. Certain parts of it, yeah. But it takes time to learn, Jiraiya pointed out. And as for the princess here, she's been sketchy on the details of how hers work in particular. But given that it requires chakra control well beyond what the average shinobi is capable of at the moment, I'm not inclined to think Naruto would be capable. Karin-chan might be able to though. Sarutobi had planned on placing her into Shizun's course as a student, if only because it would be a waste not to with her being stuck in the village for the time being. He looked over to Tsunade. Your thoughts? The Tsunade shook her head. I designed my seal specifically for someone who doesn't have an ability like hers. There's no telling how the two would interact with one another without testing, and even then there's still a number of other risks. In a worst-case scenario that doesn't kill her, she may lose her inherent ability, and that would be a waste from a purely medical standpoint since you'd be taking away the ability to save the living for the dead. That just leaves you then, Jiraiya said. You're descended from their clan by your grandmother's side, and the Senju are also distant relatives of the Uzumaki. Your claim would be pretty strong. She glared at him again. Jiraiya, you heard that last part. I am the last person in this world who wouldn't be tempted to raise someone from the grave if the opportunity for a perfect resurrection was in front of me, even if the only cost would be my own life. Don't say that. Jiraiya's demeanor changed and his voice grew harsher. Neither Dan nor Nawaki would want to hear that. Her glare turned venomous at the mention of those two, and Saratobi suspected it was only by the thinnest margin that she didn't leap up to try and bash in his skull. The point, she said through clenched teeth, I'm making is that your brat is the most suited for it, and there's no telling how many years it'll be before he's capable of doing that if ever. Rather than staking their lives on relics of a clan that's all but gone, you need to find another way. Saratobi didn't think she was exactly wrong. It wasn't fair to place so much on the shoulders of those two, but it was still a chance to deal with Orochimaru once and for all. Regardless, there's still another matter to discuss. Jiraiya, you can't keep delaying it. Jiraiya sucked in a sharp breath, his chest expanding and tension threading his body. I can't take the hat yet. Orochimaru is still out there. I am not long for this world, Jiraiya, Saratobi told him. I would rather spend my remaining time with my son and grandson, knowing that I have left a suitable candidate in the position. I know, Sensei. The Toad Sage sighed. I thought that I had closure when Orochimaru was dead, and that I was ready. But he's still out there, more dangerous than ever. If I take the hat, I won't be able to leave the village to chase him down or train Naruto to deal with Akatsuki. There are many who would welcome you to the position right now. But the longer you take, the more people will doubt that you have the determination and desire to watch over and protect them, Saratobi warned him. I suspect even now there are others who oppose my desire and will move against you in the shadows. Danzo Shimura was patient as he sat within one of his underground bases located within the leaf, a hand on his cane and back straight while flanked by two of his root-trained Anbu. He was awaiting the arrival of the men he'd sent out in response to a message that he received earlier in the morning from one of his contacts. It was a message requesting a meeting with Orochimaru, who had revived himself and sought an alliance to kill Hiruzen and Jiraiya. In the grand scheme of things, Orochimaru had been the greatest failure to ever come out of Root. Those trained within Root were supposed to be loyal to him, who was in turn loyal to the village that he had served since shortly after its founding. With his brilliance, much good could have been done in service to their village. Alas, now he haunted them. I should have had him killed the moment Hiruzen cited that he had become too power-hungry, he thought to himself as he recalled the meeting to determine the fourth Hokage at the time. If he'd looked closer, Danzo would have seen the signs earlier that Orochimaru couldn't be trusted. But he always felt he could use the madman a little more, giving him just a little more space to act on his own accord. Never again would he make that mistake, especially after he had the audacity to resurrect the second Hokage whom Danzo and Hiruzen had served under as a weapon against the village he died to protect. That was unforgivable, spitting in the face of self-sacrifice that encompassed what a shinobi should be. Naturally, the contact had to be terminated after they obtained the proposed meeting place and arranged it. They couldn't risk having such a vulnerable spot in their network. But at the very least, if his men succeeded where the others failed, then that was good enough to warrant the sacrifice. The doors to the chamber opened with the arrival of Fu and Torun, two of his most valued agents. They took their place before him and kneeled. Using his Sharingan, he inspected them subtly for any influences of foreign chakra or signs of mind control. It never hurt to be cautious after all. Aside from the injuries beneath their bandages that they kept hidden away, there were no traces. Report. The meeting was also an ambush, it seems, Fu said. They used some kind of technique to masquerade others under the appearance of Orochimaru and Kabuto Yakushi, even with our measures. And when we set out to eliminate them, they exploded into thousands of serpents, and we were beset by some of his troops bearing cursed seals or humanoid animal forms. We managed to eliminate them, but a number of ours died in the process, and most of us were bitten and treated for poisoning. Though his face remained an impassive, stony mask, he couldn't help but have his fingers tighten around his cane at the fact that both of the traitors to Root had eluded death once more. However, his men were not to blame. They had performed their tasks as expected, to the best of their abilities, and he couldn't afford needless deaths at the moment. Ensure that all of their injuries are properly seen to, as well as your own, he said as he rose from his seat, towering over the kneeling shinobi. I want them ready to move the moment we find another trace of either of the traitors. They cannot be allowed to threaten the village further. Yes, sir, they replied in unison as he turned to leave. There was nothing further to discuss. As Danzo made his way to the exit of the base, his thoughts drifted to that meeting to determine the fourth Hokage again and the position itself. Hiruzen wouldn't live much longer. Danzo could see it every time they met, how he struggled to keep himself sitting straight to maintain the image of vigil. If not for Tsunade, masquerading as that new aid of his under a transformation that he could easily peer through with his implanted Sharingan, he suspected that his elderly teammate would have already been on death's door. Though the death of his childhood friend would be unpleasant, Hiruzen was fortunate as it was to have lived as long as he had when no Hokage before him had such luxury. But his long life and this fragile peace had dulled his understanding of what it meant to be a shinobi and made him soft. It was a mercy that he would die in his bed while clinging to his naive ideals, rather than seeing them crushed as the village burned. The issue was his successor. To become the new Hokage, one needed to be elected with the consent of the Fire Daimyo, fostering goodwill between them to prevent a situation like what happened to the previous Wind Daimyo. However, many people had their disagreements with his methods that were known, so Danzo was unlikely to attain the position using that method. Even if he used Kotomasakami to sway them, if they suspected that mind control was involved, then there were a number of ways to check for the influence of it within the village. The only way it would properly work was if it was made clear that Hiruzen's softness was weakening the village. The failed invasion would have been a potential avenue for that. However, with Jiraiya's public actions during that invasion attempt, he was the most likely candidate. Leaving aside his more deplorable habits, Jiraiya was a somewhat capable shinobi if Danzo had to admit. Far more than someone who ran away from their duty like Tsunade, though her medical skills were still valued. He managed an independent spy network that was exceedingly difficult to pin down or infiltrate, had secured an alliance with the Toads to the Hidden Leaf Village, and had numerous war accomplishments to his name. Most importantly, he had been active in his attempts to kill Orochimaru, and was one of the few that Danzo suspected would eventually prevail. That was part of the reason he preferred the man to keep doing that, as it would solve both of his problems. However, Hiruzen's misguided teachings have poisoned his mind, and many of the same issues born of the master's idealism would resurface during the student's tenure. Not to mention, Hiruzen had at least acknowledged the need for Danzo's skills until the Uchiha had to be purged. He'd even spared him after the admittedly hasty assassination attempt on his life a decade or so back, perhaps due to their shared history. However, Danzo suspected he would receive no such courtesy from the Toad Sage, and the man would not heed his advice, very likely leading the village to ruin. Fortunately, Jiraiya was hesitant to take the position until Orochimaru was dealt with. Despite there being other candidates, Hiruzen would stubbornly hold onto the position of Hokage until his choice consented or died. So Danzo had more time to plan out how to ensure their village retained its strength and became great again. But first he had to find where Orochimaru had slithered off to, and he would, even if he had to comb every inch of the continent. Orochimaru laid down flat on a surgery table, and Roman 4 drip attached to his arm to keep his body hydrated in preparation for the body modification surgery. It would be some time before he could transition into Sasuke's body, and ensuring that his current one didn't die before then took priority now that news of his survival had reached both of the old fools in the leaf. The island laboratory he was in now was secure at least, since it was only known to him and his most promising protege, Kabuto. "I really do wish you would stop struggling, Anko-chan," he said to himself as her chakra continued to resist being overtaken within him. Part of what made it possible to exchange bodies with a host involved compatibility, and the cursed seal's function as a secondary chakra source also carried traces of his own that would make it easier to overwrite should he need to use the body. That allowed him to easily supplant the soul and make his own dominate. However, while Anko's body was compatible, she hadn't used her cursed seal since he'd given it to her, and thus it was taking time to overwrite hers entirely. Made worse was the fact that he was attempting to do so using the little chakra of his own he'd reabsorbed from the other cursed seal holders in his other base, stripping the prisoners of them to become a little more whole. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that his current state was akin to a snake that had devoured particularly large prey, leaving him to rest as he digested it. The door to the room opened as Kabuto approached. He had a tray of medical tools at his disposal in preparation for the modifications. "The plan went as expected on both ends, Lord Orochimaru," Kabuto reported. "Both of the Hokage are within the sealed hall and Danzo's men have been infected. Once the cells finish propagating and overriding their own, they'll be ready for use and we can proceed to phase 2. "Excellent," Orochimaru said to that. "And what of our most prominent sleeper in the village?" He'd have to remember to thank Sasori for that technique. Granted, he'd modified the current version more to his liking, only breaking the seal temporarily when a signal was sent out by one of Kabuto's relay serpents. But it served well for the purposes of having their remaining spies within the village stay undetected. And what better spy was one that didn't know they were a spy at all until needed? "They remain undetected," he reported. "The relay serpent will have their next report soon, though I am still working on attaining the information they requested. The necessary samples are proving difficult to sort through and use impure world resurrection on, given how they were buried and the rate of decomposition. But I suspect everything will be ready before long." A slight hum left Orochimaru's mouth in satisfaction at the development. Soon all the pieces would be in place, and this time he would make sure that the Leaf Village was destroyed. Not just by overwhelming force, but by poisoning the very roots hidden in the dark and rotting it from the inside out. "Is everything all right?" Naruto asked, peering up from the board game on the table towards the red-haired Jinchuriki of the hidden sand. He'd taken to trying to visit Gaara every other morning just to talk to him and pass the time before he met with Jiraiya for training. So he'd gotten a good enough read on Gaara to tell something was off. "You look tired." "I have been experiencing nightmares of the one-tailed raccoon," Gaara admitted, causing Naruto's expression to shift in alarm at that from knowing that the reason for his insomnia previously was because if he was asleep the chakra demon within him would begin to torment his mind. "Has something gone wrong with the seal Jiraiya placed on you?" "They have checked the overlaying seal and found nothing wrong," he stated. "As far as I can tell, they are presuming that it is simply nothing more than nightmares, so once my curfew sets in, they provide me with a sleeping pill to ensure that I at least get rest. However, it is bothersome that I cannot enjoy my sleep anymore." "That's rough," Naruto couldn't help but say. He was amicable to sleep, but Gaara had been unable to do so for years since having the chakra demon implanted within him. It was a luxury to him that he enjoyed, a silver lining to his captivity that also played into why he was being a model prisoner. And it's just started happening recently. "Yes, though I can't fathom why it started in the first place, I can only hope that it does not linger." Gaara then turned his attention back to the board and moved his piece, taking the place of one of Naruto's and capturing it. "How have you been progressing in your training?" About as well as I can, I guess." It had been roughly a few weeks since Naruto had been bound to the village, arguably for his own safety after the attempt to retrieve Anko Mitarashi had failed. Karin didn't take it well, and Naruto felt frustrated himself since he felt partly to blame for it after losing control, so he'd put more effort into his training as well. He had gotten the invisibility technique down for the most part, though it didn't last long for him since yin chakra wasn't exactly his forte despite having Sakura's help in learning how to convert it. The Rasengan was somewhat coming along as well, since he had to learn to form it without a clone to handle the rotation and containment, and he'd made good progress in learning to use his wind element. However, he was struggling with the more inner-focused parts of his training. He was supposed to meditate, learn to still his body and quiet his mind, but he found it extremely difficult to do so when he had so many other concerns. Hopefully they'll get rid of those cursed seals on them soon, Naruto thought to himself as he made his next move on the board and moved the conversation along. "So, did you read the letter you were sent by your sister?" "I have," he said. "It merely inquired into my health and informed me of some minor changes within the village. It would seem that so far things have improved somewhat with a new wind daimyo, though at present they haven't selected a new candidate to become the Kazekage." "Any idea who they'd choose?" "The candidates for it would need to someone of prowess and social standing, or possibly possessing a bloodline similar to the third Kazekage and my father. As I was only told what was needed in relevance to my missions and my handler was executed, I am unaware of their choice." He knocked over another piece on Naruto's side. "And this is my victory." "Huh?" Naruto looked down to see that he was in a position where he couldn't make any moves. He was forced to concede defeat. One more round before I have to leave." Kiba gave chase as Sakura ran through the smokescreen-laden training ground. She was fleeing, trying to use the smoke to obscure her presence until the time limit ran out. But it was pointless as he and Akamaru closed the distance as a whirling pair of twisters from the front and back, cutting through the air with ludicrous speed. "Gotcha!" Kiba announced as he and Akamaru stopped their spinning and turned the momentum into a lunge, arms outstretched to pin her down. Yet the pair ended up sinking through her and crashing into each other, ending into a tangled mess of limbs as they hit the ground. Kiba watched as the clone proceeded to disperse and swore under his breath. Then the sound of parting air reached his ears. He spun off the ground along with his transformed ninja hound, getting back onto his feet in time to avoid the hail of dulled kunai that came from the above. He watched as Sakura pulled herself out of the tree she was half sunken into, and then ran off into the smoke again, leaving him snarling in frustration. Kurenai-sensei had given their unit the task of chasing down and capturing Sakura within 15 minutes as part of a training exercise. Normally, it wouldn't be a problem for them to deal with since, between the three of them, there was no way she could reasonably get away. They were awesome like that after all, and Sakura was just one kunoichi, even with those extra lessons that Kurenai had been giving her. However, after 10 minutes of chasing her down and God knows how many traps she'd set up, meaning she knew damn well ahead of time they were going to do this exercise, while they didn't, he just wanted it to end. So he had been more than a little frustrated when he and Akamaru picked up her scent and rushed towards her again. They poured on the speed to catch her once he found her crouching down and preparing another trap. This time he felt resistance and held fast, pulling her arms behind her back as Akamaru grabbed her legs to stop her from getting away. Finally, her figure wavered and flickered out to reveal that it was his teammate. "Shino?" Shino groaned softly, clearly in pain, as a pair of hands stuck out of the ground holding another gas-filled smoke bomb. The slender fingers pulled the string and detonated it point blank, catching them before they could scramble away. The world tilted and Kiba fell over with a scant few moments of consciousness remaining. "Damn it," he managed to say before passing out. "I'm sorry," Sakura said as she phased out of the ground, while Kurenai arrived with Hinata in tow to check on her students. "I planned on him getting frustrated for that last part to work, but I didn't expect that he'd hit Shino that hard." Is he going to be okay? Kiranai asked her Hyuga protege. I told Kiba not to use excessive force in subduing the target as a precaution, but I could hear the crashing from past the tree line. Hinata, whose eyes were active, nodded her head. Kiba-kun didn't break anything, but he'll be bruised where they hit. I'll have to work on teaching him to keep a level head so it doesn't happen again. Kiranai huffed before turning to Sakura and giving her a slight smile in approval. But that was well done. I didn't expect for you to get all three of them in the end. It was only possible because you gave me a week's warning in advance, and they expected me to use genjutsu right away, Sakura explained. Kiranai had approached her after practice, once she'd gotten the hang of the hiding in a surface technique to supplement her genjutsu lessons. She wanted to observe how her students would react to an unexpected scenario, which was in this case being a target who knew in advance they would be coming and had foreknowledge of their abilities, a very real possibility if they became more renowned over time. Naturally, they expected Sakura to use a genjutsu right off the bat, since that was what Kiranai was known for. Genjutsu worked best when the target didn't realize they were under one, so that naturally put her at an even greater disadvantage since Sakura knew that all three of them could track and disable her with relative ease. It was a challenge to plan for, to say the least. I expected you to make preparations, Kiranai admitted, but the order and execution were almost perfectly done given the time constraints. None of it would have worked if you hadn't removed Hinata. That's why I aimed for her first. She turned to Hinata. No offense, but I couldn't think of a way to get anything done since your eyes made it too difficult to hide what I was doing compared to the others. So I considered Naruto's match during the finals and asked Tenten how she would deal with your cousin when they practiced to be safe. Then I came up with that plan. Said plan basically involved launching a ball of ceiling tags towards them, expecting them to dodge. It then forcibly released multiple other bombs that contained sleeping gas, blanketing the area they were in with it. Shino's insects could purge it from his body and Kiba could get out of the area quick enough with Akamaru, but she couldn't before it put her under. Medics and sensors are the first to be targeted because you need to take out any advantages they bring to the opposition, Kiranai said in agreement as she turned to Hinata. If she hadn't caught you by surprise, what measure would you have used to deal with it? And how did you being taken out change things for the group as a whole? I would have held my breath and pulled back, or try to use the rotation technique if I could manage it, Hinata said. But I was surprised, so I didn't react in time. And because I had to be taken out of the area, Shino-kun split from Kiba-kun and Akamaru. Which was what I wanted, Sakura added. Shino could cover a larger area with his insects, but he's slower than Kiba and Akamaru. Since internal genjutsu requires a developed brain, and they're insects that track through scent and sight, he would ideally be able to find me faster and be unaffected by genjutsu. So he'd respond by spreading a net. That put a good portion of his hive out for her to deal with. Naruto had gotten to the point where he could simply use a wind technique to blow them away or spread clones out for them to deal with, while Sasuke could burn them all with fire. But Sakura needed to reserve her chakra, so she took another page out of Naruto's book and used concussive ceiling tags-filled smoke. She'd considered using the same gas Naruto used during the finals, but decided against it since she'd be affected too that were altered to radiate out in a larger area at the expense of having less force behind them. Being so small, his bugs were a lot more vulnerable to the shockwaves disrupting their internal systems and thus easier to kill. And with the smoke screen up, Shino wouldn't risk going too deeply into it without replenishing his hive. So he'd have the remainder ready to guard him against any frontal attack she could make as he hastened the process of hatching them within his body, locking him into one place. Sakura then turned her gaze towards Kiba and Akamaru. As for them, Kakashi-sensei raised ninja hounds, so I asked him for advice. Ninja hounds are vulnerable to internal genjutsu, allowing me to start interfering with their senses like what was done to my team during the Chunin exams by the team from Hidden Rain. I had to be gradual in doing so, slowly altering their sense of smell and hearing while putting up a chase so they didn't notice. But by that point, they were frustrated enough that when I led them to where Shino was and sank into the ground, they struck first without realizing the switch. And that allowed you to bypass Shino's insects since you couldn't get close to him, Kirinai finished. Misdirection and deception are the most powerful tools available for someone who doesn't fight head-on. If you keep that in mind, I'm sure you'll excel in the future. Thank you for the compliment, ma'am. The mystical palm technique generates the chakra that allows it to hasten the body's recovery depending on where it's directed, but you have to make sure that you don't overdo it, Shizune instructed as she went around observing the various attendees of her medical training course. Before the fish suffocates, you should be able to discern both the nature of the wound, the cause of it, and fix it. Once you're done, place it back into the bowl and record it on the report.
Yes, ma'am, the students as a whole responded, Karin included as her hands shone with pale green light. They'd gotten a basic understanding of anatomy and practiced generating the medical chakra necessary to use the mystical palm technique. The green hue of the chakra seemingly came from the balance between yang chakra and unaligned chakra, giving the body enhancing qualities of the former while maintaining the versatility of the latter. There were other techniques a medic nin would need over the course of their career, but for first aid and emergency treatment, it would suffice.
She held it over the bleeding fish in front of her that writhed sluggishly, likely drugged and numbed to the pain from a cut in its side that allowed its blood to leak out. The chakra sank into its body and spread through her chakra control, mapping it and giving her insight into the nature of the wound. It was a shallow cut that severed a few veins and arteries, the length of which was precisely 3 inches long and done cleanly with no fragments from a blade or particles. Most likely wind chakra or a chakra scalpel, she reasoned. To be safe, she activated her mind's eye and narrowed her focus on the fish to search for any traces of lingering chakra. Impressively, it took her a few seconds to pick up the chakra signature within it. The cut was so cleanly done and with so few traces of chakra that it was like trying to pick a black grain of sand in a patch of white. Committing it to memory for the time being, she concentrated on the wounded area and used the medical chakra to have the fish's body constrict the blood vessels to avoid any more of it from leaking out. Then she began to hasten the healing process, destroying dead cells, having the immune cells clean the wounds, rebuilding the lost tissue to repair the damaged veins and arteries, and repairing everything else. Another scan followed, searching for any mistakes she made. It wouldn't do to make the arteries too weak to support the flow of blood. Once she was sure that it was fine, she normalized the bodily functions that she had been manipulating. Then she pulled as much of her own chakra out of the fish before gently placing it back into its bowl and writing her report. Of the 30 or so applicants in the course, most of them had ended up killing their fish in the end by either healing them wrong or letting them suffocate. Others had been more successful to varying degrees. Karin's was swimming in its bowl, waiting to be inspected along with her report as she sat patiently while deep in thought. The Hawkage had added Anko's name to the memorial stone since she was thought dead, or at least Mia. Karin had broken down crying upon hearing that at first, not just because they hadn't managed to save her, but because she knew Kabuto. Her fears about returning to captivity and within his grasp was because she knew exactly how dangerous he was and some of the horrific things he was capable of. Death would be merciful compared to finding her alive after whatever twisted thing he would do to her. And knowing that she was in the mad medic's hands because the woman chose to save her and Naruto only added to the gnawing sense of guilt deep in Karin's heart every time that she went home and looked at the door to her room. Worse was the fact that Anko's sacrifice and suffering had only bought her a little time. She knew Kabuto would come after her again at some point. He'd probably gloat about what he did to Anko too, tormenting her over it, and maybe go after Naruto. She could just imagine the things he'd do to the boy she loved in the name of sadism masquerading as science, testing just how well he could heal until he was nothing more than a misshapen lump of still living meat. That's why she took the suggestion to join the medical course when the Hawkage suggested it. He theorized that with her natural tendencies towards chakra control, she would be well suited for it and could help many people. To her, that would simply be a bonus since it meant she didn't have to let anyone else other than Naruto bite her and leave a mark in her flesh. No, she intended to fight poison with poison. If she was going to have any measure of happiness, she couldn't just keep relying on Naruto to put himself out there and getting hurt. She would learn whatever measure of medical arts she could for the sake of being able to turn it on Kabuto when the time came. Of course, she couldn't tell anyone that was what she intended to do. It was an affront to any practitioner of the medical arts, and they'd definitely try to stop her. And if Naruto learned about it, he'd be disappointed with her, which would be just awful with things between them going so well at this point. Another thing to hate Kabuto for, she thought to herself. I hate lying to Naruto, but we won't have any long-lasting happiness until Kabuto is dead. He has to die, and I have to be the one to do it. She refused to let Kabuto take anything she cared about away from her again. She would kill him with her own 2 hands, and she'd do it so thoroughly enough that there would be no trace of him left in existence by the time she was done.
Well, that will be all for part 10. Thank you for watching, and again, check out the author of this story in the description. Subscribe, like, and share so other people can see this story or video.